All right, welcome everyone. This is our second uh, conversation around emotionally surviving the dumpster fire, whatever you define as the dumpster fire. And I figured we could start with maybe a 2-minute mindfulness exercise just to help us settle and arrive. So inviting you to take a shape that you can be in for the next minute or two and having a soft gaze or closing your eyes. That feels good to you. And maybe just starting with the energy in your feet. And maybe just staying with your feet if that feels really grounding. That connection to the earth. Maybe allowing your attention to wander up or out or in. You start to notice it's too much. It's too much activation. Come back to your feet. If you prefer to be with your breath, and just follow the inhale and the exhale. Give yourself permission to do that. You just want to listen to the sound of my voice or tune my voice out. That's fine too. Just noticing how body and your nervous system and your environment is talking to you. As we befriend the dumpster fire that so many of us are living in, just notice how your body starts to talk to you. As we just turn towards whatever that dumpster fire is in your life. Maybe that's a relationship. Maybe that's a job. Maybe that is this current administration. Maybe it is all the things we are hearing about in the news, on social media, wars abroad, genocides abroad, all the inequities, all the people who are the most vulnerable in our lives. Maybe that is even each and every one of us. As you notice your nervous system either settle, get more agitated, or check out more, seeing what can you use to resource yourself. How can you come back to here and now? What can you touch? What can you see? What can you hear? Maybe inviting you to think of an intention for our time together or a question you want to bring forward, a way that you might want to participate. And I'll invite the staff at Mindful and Multicultural Counseling, which from here on out I'll just call MMC, to check in. Names, pronouns if you feel comfortable with that, and maybe what are you noticing? What are you bringing into this space?
Go first. Christine Aguilar. So I often think in pictures. I feel coiled. That's what I noticed with the mindfulness, and the picture is almost that of like a jack in the box. So like I feel at times absolutely enraged and afraid about what I'm hearing and reading in the news. And almost over controlled. And there's a sense of, if I am not skillful, I'm going to lose it. And that's the popping out, like just one thing's going to set me and I'll go into a self-righteous kind of tirade. So I'm just really trying to do the everyday skills to remain effective. That's my goal.
I can go. Caitlin Fair, she, her pronouns. I have been feeling very similar to Christine, I think, probably up until very recently, when I decided to try to take a little bit more control over the things that are within my control, and stop giving myself over so much to some of the things that are just being put out into the world that I'm consuming. And so I've been focusing on small things that I can do within my household, and in my personal life to try to feel a little bit more secure despite what is happening, that is outside of my control, and reminding myself that we all have spheres of influence, and the most that we can do is focus on what is within our own personal sphere of influence. And there are things that we can and cannot influence, and to believe and hope that the people who are in other spheres of influence are doing their due diligence, and just having faith that's happening as I'm committing to doing what I can within my own sphere of influence. So I think that has been really helpful for me to kind of ground me and recenter me and help with some of that tension that I think that Christine is describing, that I've also been feeling, and just trying to bring myself back from that.
I can go next. My name is Araceli Reyes. Something I've noticed during the mindfulness, it's almost like this, not only emotional bracing, like bracing for an impact of some kind, but also the physical manifestation of that. And things I've been doing is trying to regulate how much I tune in to what's going on in the world and how much I tune out. Sometimes I'm a little bit better one some days than others. So that's what I noticed with the mindfulness.
I'll go next. I'm Taryn Chase. My pronouns are she, her. I kind of noticed the opposite of Christine. I tend to like numb out and like feel nothing. And I think also because like I've dealt with a lot of physical pain and injuries from like athletics or from working out. So like what emotionally, if I'm thinking through the exercise, I notice that like I tend to kind of disconnect more, not notice as much tension as a safety mechanism. And like it kind of helps, but I also know how it can be extremely difficult then to reconnect when it's necessary, and like be able to activate parts that don't get easily activated. And so like that kind of applies both like emotionally and physically. Like if we don't work a muscle, or I know if I don't work a muscle, it atrophies and becomes harder to activate later. And so the same thing emotionally, like it takes the practice, and that's something that I'm working on.
Yeah, I'm Natalie, Edmund, she, her pronouns, and I can relate to what you were saying, Taryn, as someone who I think can spend a decent amount of time in my window of tolerance, but also in dorsal vagal, like in more like shutdown mode. Sometimes for me, I have to like check myself, like, is this you just chill in your window of tolerance? Or is this you like maybe not quite connecting to things? And it's like, I've been like doing this nervous system stuff for almost 20 years, and I still don't know some days. Um, and I imagine because it's probably on the edge. Um, and and I don't feel these days like great despair and hopelessness, which is why I'm saying I think I'm on the edge, because there have been times in the last couple of months where I have felt great despair or hopelessness. Um, and I've been listening to this to a lot of stuff about fascism, but I've been listening to this podcast, Fascism Barometer, and it started I guess in October, and she has a guest every week or every couple of weeks. And I really appreciated the one episode I listened to this morning. It's interesting. I was running a workshop earlier this week or last week, and I was talking about making room for grief. Because I think like sometimes, I can get caught up in the rage and the anger, and which is like more being in like hyper arousal, like more of a sympathetic response. And how could I turn towards the grief of this time? Um, the grief of people who don't think it's a dumpster fire, the people who are relishing all the policies and the deportations and the detainments and the trauma and the separation of families and the dehumanization of people.
That's more rage for me. That's grief for you. That's
Well, I guess
just more rage.
Yeah, but I guess I wonder about like, couldn't rage be a part of grief?
I'm sure. It feels like surrender to me, so I'm not even ready to go there.
Right. And for me, it feels expansive. So
Okay.
it's so interesting, right? Like,
Yeah,
I'd
yeah.
love to hear what others think of like, is feeling into the grief surrender, or could it be expansive depending on who you are and where you're at in the process? Because it's not going away anytime soon. And
I'm
that's what they
hoping some
said.
of the folks that have joined us are willing to, turn their mics on and share some thoughts about this.
I'll share a little bit. I'm Canadian, so sometimes I feel like I have a different perspective, but it's really nice to hear that people in the States are, sort of experiencing a similar thing, because that's not always what we hear. We sort of hear the negative of the people that you said that relish in what's going on.
Mm.
So just because I'm finding this is affecting my practice, all the stuff that we're hearing is happening. And then plus we're being threatened with annexation too, right? So I'm just finding it's helping me sort of tease out some stuff and validates what my experience, even though I'm not American and in the States, that, we're experiencing similar rage. So I just find it validating. Thank you.
So I'm still tied to this grief thing. I want to hear what people think about grief as a process, not a feeling, a process. That's what this person was talking about in the podcast, right? That grief isn't a feeling, it's a process.
I would like to talk a little bit about that in terms of the way that I experience it. I think I experience a level of grief, and I think that interestingly, I think that some people, to your point, Natalie, about like who don't see this as problematic or like are not feeling what we think perhaps people should be feeling about what's going on. There is a dissonance that occurs or that has to occur to accept kind of where we are versus what our expectations were At least for me, like there was a point in time where I had to kind of grapple with the fact that what I thought was the world, or what I thought, how I thought people operated, um, what I thought I could expect from the systems around me, from my government, from people around me, was not necessarily what was true, at least not across the board. And I think there was an experience for me of kind of like a pendulum swing where like I trusted and felt hopeful and felt optimistic about the world. And then I had some realizations, and this has been a long process for me. I've been in this for over a decade. Um, this like kind of pendulum swing where it was like, oh no, nothing is good and everything is bad and I can't trust anything at all and I don't even know what to think about anything. And so I think over the past many years there has been kind of this like Newton's cradle experience happening where I swing gradually back and forth between kind of these lessening extremes of like, oh no, like things are okay, there's hope, there's optimism, people are good, we can trust certain systems, or things are coming along, and systems of oppression are being pushed back against and we're making progress, and then swinging to this other kind of version of like, oh no, like we're not making any progress and we're going backwards and all of this, and just kind of going between these different kind of polar ends of things. But gradually I my hope is that I'm eventually kind of coming to this middle ground. If anyone knows how a Newton's cradle works, where I can hold the multiple truths of the world that we live in, right? That there are lots of amazing and wonderful people and systems and people trying to do things that are, doing good, and pushing back against some of these other forces that also exist in the world that are not necessarily in people's best interest. So that I can really be intentional about the way that I'm contributing to those things as a part of my process of grieving that not everyone functions that way, right? That there are people in this world, or there are systems in this world that are doing bad things, in my estimation, right? That are doing things that are harmful to people and groups of people. But if I only fixate on that piece of it, there is no forward motion. And for me, a part of the grieving experience is forward motion, right? Like to get stuck in grief, it no longer becomes a process, it becomes a feeling, and it becomes like a despair. Like I think it can be really easy for grief to become despair if we don't embrace the moving forward part of grief, and like the hope part of grief that does exist as a part of that process, in my experience anyway. And so trying to hold really fast to that part of the grief experience so that I don't slide into despair, which then becomes futility, right? And it's just like, oh, it's this end of the cradle that's just like everything is bad, there's no hope, why bother, and just kind of succumbing to this sense of hopelessness. And that's where I get, that scares me, that kind of that place scares me. And so really working hard to again just be present in the hope aspect and the forward motion aspect, and part of the process of grief that I think is really important to keep me personally from sliding into that place of despair.
I love that. It really resonates with me. I'd never heard of Newton's cradle, but like I was just imagining a visual, and so that feels really centering to me. And I think about, yeah, what are the skills that we utilize to get us through this time, right? That for some, right, it's like holding on to the rage, because that is mobilizing, right? And it can like maybe direct our attention to tasks, to ways of showing up, which feel empowering. And I think that's really great. And that there's so many different ways for us to mobilize, to resource, right? And for me, leaving room for all of it in its complexity, in its nuance, in its destabilization is what I'm trying to work on. And always trying to humanize people, right? Like thinking about how other people's grief about changing world, diversification, gender fluidity, like all of that stuff has caused them to like double down in all these oppressive policies and actions, and I don't want to get to a place where I have all of this unresolved grief that makes me dehumanize others. And I just know that about myself. Like I know that it would be easy for me to dehumanize others. And so that's like what I'm working, because that's a value to me, to not dehumanize others while still being rageful and holding them accountable, and like, and grieving like the end of the whatever ideas I had about what the world was, and not sure what comes next. But others.
Add to that a little bit.
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll turn my camera on. Hi, my name is Julie, and I'm not very good at the process of grief, like grieving in general. But I felt like after the elections, I had gotten so much hope, and then it just kind of all just devastatingly dismantled. And now obviously it's all the effects of, what the administration is doing right now. And I feel like I am stuck in that like despair, as that we've been saying. And I can't get out of that cycle of just being sad and angry. Yeah, and I think, I'm hoping a lot of people can kind of, find similar thoughts and feelings on that, and just know that they're not alone. Yeah, and so, yeah, I just wanted to kind of interject on that.
I appreciate your vulnerability, and frankly, when I listen to others who share sentiments similar to yours and Natalie's, I'm I guess there's part of me, it's like, gosh, I'm not there. Like I think it's, for me, it's so, it feels so much like survival mode. Um, and maybe it's my age, because I remember being young enough and watching my mom not having a lot of these rights, like to say as a woman, and then earning them, and now it's being taken away, and I find that just absolutely infuriating. So I don't know, maybe that's part of what it is for me. Maybe it's also that strong kind of fight part, that there's that it's protective, right? So if I allow myself to be vulnerable and grieve, that I might just come undone with it, right? Not sure. But I just know that the anger, it feels like sink or swim, and I'll be damned if I'm going to sink. Um,
I could share, I guess. Thanks for this workshop. What I'm thinking about in terms of grief is the example of somebody in my life who's been around since I was in high school. In my high school journalism teacher, I was the editor of my high school paper, and she taught us to think about facts and truth and to report that, and the difference between facts and opinion. And I've stayed friends with her all this time, and she moved to Florida. And the last time I talked to her, we got into a big fight because she was defending and basically saying everything that she heard from Fox News. And I got really, really sad. And I was like, we got into a fight. She hung up on me. And then later I called back and I was crying. And I just said, like, you're a really important person in my life. And I don't want us to leave it like this. She tried calling me back a million times, but not a million, but a few times, but I was so dysregulated that I just couldn't, or that's maybe not the right word, but I just couldn't deal with it at that time. And then I got a Christmas card saying, it's sad that we're not talking because of politics. And I was like, okay, that's not exactly it. It's like, it's that I'm grieving over the loss of a thinking person who's now believing lies and doesn't see what's going on. And, I sent out a Valentine's Day card saying that I will call, but I haven't yet because I just don't know what to say beyond a 1-minute conversation of, you're a very important person to me. You really helped save my life at a time when I was a teenager and very suicidal, actually having a suicide attempt. And this person like helped me, was a second mother, was there for me. And she knew I was a lesbian. And now she's aligned with these forces that are like dismantling DEIA and doing all these horrible things that are basically harming so many people. And I mean, I don't know what to say. And all I do is just like, I can't pick up that phone and call. And it's very sad. And this person is 84 years old. And I just think, that just might be it. I'll just have closure. And if this person dies and I never talk to her again, then I guess that's what it is. And I just try to understand. And just very, very hard because it is very, very sad what's happened and that people are uh, just going along very blindly to this whole thing, and that the rest of us are very aware of what's going on. And sometimes I'm just like, I can't watch the news, I can't watch it, I can't see what's going on. I just have to stay in what my life is, because I finally sort of gotten it together a bit. Thank you, Christine, and my therapist. And tomorrow I will have 3 years and 6 months sober and clean. And it's just like, my life is falling into place, and I'm not going to go back to that sad place of despair. And then I just, I think last time I was on this workshop, I talked about my social media and how I was and I started doing less of that. But then the other day I was just like, people and children are starving in Gaza. And I just had to put, a thing on my social media. I have 981 friends on Facebook, and I'm just like, I don't know. People should know. What are we going to do is the question. And I think, and then I've been practicing each morning to be praying, sending out prayers to the suffering, including myself. And that sets me off in a good path. And yeah, I don't know. That's my coping, I guess, my coping. And, you know, just trying to do the little things that I can do. Yep. Thanks.
Julia, I loved what you just said about prayers for the suffering, including yourself. I hadn't thought about that before now, and I really liked that. My feeling is I majored in German in college, and so I studied a lot of World War II literature, and it's been very easy for a lot of us to say, I would never in such and such a place. And I still don't think that I would do many of those things, but seeing, first of all, in 2016, my naivete really shattered. I really thought we were a better country. Really, really did. And I know my BIPOC citizens will laugh at me for that, but I really thought we were a better country than we were. And I'm still grieving that. And then I thought, Caitlin was mentioning a pendulum, and I thought the pendulum kind of swung back a little bit in 2020. And then for it to come back again in 24, my grief is just still there. And like, I just see how far and how quickly we're descending. And I keep thinking about what those citizens in Germany in the 30s were doing. And I realize that the MAGAs and the Nazis were a minority, but they did so many heinous things so quickly. And the vast population of Germany, there were resistors, but so many people couldn't do anything because they were so scared for their own families. And I just feel I'm scared to watch the news. I'm not a leader type person. I'm a really good vice president. I'm a really good executive. I will follow, you know, I don't want to say I'll follow orders, that sounds badly, but like, I'm not a leader. And I just keep looking to our Congress people for leadership. And so what I'm also grieving is the lack of leadership. I'm grieving the lack of, I've done as a citizen, I've done what I thought that I could. I wrote letters, I called, I donated, I marched. And like, in the end, it feels like it didn't matter. And so I'm just looking for the leadership that I can follow. Like, there's the tipping point, you know, if one person yells, it doesn't matter, but if two, and then three, and then four, I just keep waiting for the tipping point that I can join in the resistance. And I feel guilty about that. I feel guilty for not being a leader. I feel guilty for not being a rabble rouser, but that's just not me. And so Julia was also mentioning about social media. I've really tried to back off social media, but I also feel like my one act of resistance can be to share news and can be to share moments of positivity. So I guess I'm just feeling a lot of confliction along with my grief. Thank you for listening.
So I think in some ways that's the point with the powers that be, like that onslaught, because folks are very aware that when we have a lot coming at us, all this horrendous, shit, that most people just shut down their nervous system. They just get overwhelmed and they're afraid. They're looking at the harm that happens to others and they become afraid. And I think that's the point, right? And so maybe what would be effective for all of us to do is to get a little bit more savvy in that, okay, so what do we need to do to take care of our nervous systems, right? We need to first off, recognize what's happening, know what our limits are, and have a skill basis that we can regulate ourselves, right? And an idea that is not mine that I'm going to share, because I like it, was, identify maybe your top, I don't know, 3 or 5 issues, like things that really get you either triggered or, you're really into, because there's going to be there's a lot of it coming at us. And maybe you then donate to find the organizations that are established working on those things and send some money or some time or some letter writing to help them out, right? So you're still being effective, but you're also conserving your energy and narrowing your focus, right? Because I think all of it is by design for us to be just like, oh my God. I mean, personally, I've upped my exercise game, not helping, right? maybe on some level. And it just feels like this onslaught. I don't know, listening to each other, validating each other. I think all of that can help. But just again, trying to recognize what's going on so we don't shut down and numb out. Because in my mind, at least, I would feel complicit if I became silent. So.
I really appreciate the people who write about like activism can show up in a lot of different ways. So if you don't see yourself as like the front and center leading the charge, but there's so many other activities to do, like so some of the things that Christine mentioned, and part of my disillusionment over the last year has been recognizing that the two-party system is not going to save anybody but the super privileged and wealthy. And so my disillusionment, right? Because for many years, while I was moving towards abolition, I still believed like if you could be a really progressive Democrat, like that could make radical change. And the disillusionment of the last year is like, no, the system is working the way, like we're going to be in the center and move a little to the left or a lot to the right, but we're never going to really get to the really progressive left that I want, which means there has to be a third way. And then that's destabilizing because it's like, how do you build power when there's so much money in the two-party system? So, but like, I love learning about working families movement and the Green Party and like all these other little movements that can make a real difference in people's lives, and like how to plug in to what exists in communities like grassroots that may not get as much attention, but really can change a lot. So I'm trying to like do the disillusionment, but not hit despair or hopelessness, or don't stay there, and find like little ways to experience joy, little ways to connect, little ways to make a difference in my circle of influence, and then repeat and repeat and repeat.
I just added something in the chat for those of you who play D&D or any kind of role-playing fantasy, anything. I found this actually, I think, during 2016. You don't have to be a social justice warrior. You can be a social justice wizard. You can be a social justice warlock. You could be a social justice cleric or druid. And that's where I try to be. That's where I try to use my social media as like a social justice educator of like, hey, this is going on or whatever. So again, I feel like it's a very drop in the ocean, but I think that's what you're talking about, Natalie, is like finding your facet and what can you do. And it might be a grain of sand, but it helps your little neighborhood circle.
And maybe it's sustainable, right? Like if this is like, it's not going to end in 3.5 years, right? Like this is going to take years, decades to dig ourselves out of. So like what's sustainable, right? Because we like hopefully still want to live a life and try to make that life as meaningful as possible within the restrictions that exist. And I think like that's radical, that's revolutionary, is to live. The person in the podcast was talking about like how do you live your most meaningful and purposeful life in these times? And so that's, I guess, what I invite all of us to think is, how are you living your most meaningful and purposeful life within these circumstances? What else are people metabolizing or questioning or feeling?
I do like to stay connected to Facebook. A little bit Instagram. Instagram always has a lot of very nice Buddhist posts. Very calming. And then just a small another anecdote of at the end of Ramadan, people were posting where they could donate to because apparently that's part of the ritual and of Ramadan. And I connected with some people and said like, oh, here's a few places that I've donated to, and they were like, oh, that's a good idea, and like they were open to anything. And I said, oh, Southern Poverty Law Center is a really good place that fights hate crimes. So, because there's a lot of hate, and yeah, so that I thought that was really very interesting, and thinking about like just on the like what you were just saying, how can we live these meaningful, purposeful lives, and just trying to think about something to do every day, to try to make the world just a tiny bit of a better place. I know that's like a big cliche, but oh, what the heck? There's something we can do. So just be of service in some way. Yeah.
Julie, you look like you were gonna say something. Is that accurate?
Yes, I was just trying to think of a good, nice way to put it.
Oh, we don't need the politeness. Nah.
No, I was just thinking like tapping back into the rage of all of this. How I've noticed that I've lost a lot of trust in the people around me because, after the elections, people who are closest to me have come out being supporters of this current administration, and how that could also tap into a lot of the disillusionment that I have been going through as well. And also seeing, everyone posts on social medias and how many people I have unfriended and deleted off of, all my social media accounts because they were being very obnoxious about everything. And that I think also, kind of taps fills up my rage cup a little bit. And I it it's kind of changed me in the sense of like I used to be a very bubbly and like not like overly happy person like when it comes to strangers and other people, but now I've noticed that I've kind of shut myself off to like strangers, and like I don't exactly want to hold the door for people or like say hello in the mornings, because I just don't trust that they have like the good intentions that I once thought that everybody did. And also just I don't know, like as a person of color, I don't trust that people see me as their equal. I always in the back of my mind have that little like sense of, oh, like they see me as an Asian person and they have like thoughts about that, or and that's kind of been really tough to like just carry on a daily basis, because I work in a hospital and I see a different bunch of people every day, and to just to have even that sort of doubt in my mind where somebody could possibly say something rude or just not nice, it kind of it can ruin your day in like a second. So yeah, I just wanted to share that.
So appreciate everybody sharing. I was thinking about the comment that was made earlier, and that I think about reckoning with these supremacy systems, all the different supremacy systems, like inevitably, it does require breaking up with people. And I think that's part of, I was trying to think of like, why don't I feel as much rage as I did before? And I think for me, like the rage was so all consuming for like years. And I didn't, and now I feel like the rage is still there. I mean, any moment it could get reactivated pretty intensely. But I think really sitting with, like, I could really relate to what you were saying, Julie, about, yeah, I do feel like I'm less friendly than I once was to, and because I just assume most people are in that apathetic middle or extreme, like, add all the isms. And I just don't want to engage with the apathetic middle or like the extreme racist, transphobic, whatever, blah, blah, xenophobics. And like, so that's the sitting in like, but I want to live a full life. And so like, who are the people I can spend time with who get like that, like we need to get stuff done. Whatever that stuff is, we need to get stuff done.
I think to that point, Natalie, something for me that is important in terms of thinking of the living a full life thing, being friendly is a part of what feels like living a full life to me. And that has been really challenging, because it has been harder to be open and friendly with people. And there is an exhaustion that happens with all of the rage that makes it more tiring to want to expend that energy or have that energy to expend. And so that's something that I have found myself trying to figure out the balance with, because it feels good to me when I'm able to be cheerful and friendly and connect with people in an open way. And that doesn't always feel safe, even as a white-bodied person, to do that. And I also know that I have a role as a white-bodied person to stand in the gap a little bit with that, because I don't have to necessarily protect myself as much in certain settings. Even as a queer person, I'm typically perceived as straight in most of the spaces that I'm in because I'm very femme presenting. And so unless I'm intentionally kind of outing myself in those spaces, I can keep that to myself, right? And so there's this really interesting kind of like in between space that I find myself trying to navigate, where I'm taking on the responsibility that I feel is mine within these systems to push back and advocate and engage with people that I have the privilege to be able to engage with, while also protecting my energy so that I can live a full life, and also trying to combat the rage and exhaustion that makes it difficult for me to embody the openness and connectivity and friendliness and cheerfulness that feels good to me to be able to exist within. And that's really challenging. That's really challenging for me. But I have found that, kind of going back to the first comment that I made, finding ways that I can feel more secure within my personal sphere has helped me to be able to embody that cheerfulness and that friendliness with the people who I know are of a similar mind to me, but also to open that in a way to people who I'm unsure about, and try to embody that a little bit more in the world, not because I owe it to anybody else, but because I know that that's something that feels good to me in my system. And so to be able to kind of offer that in spaces where it feels safe to do that has been a powerful offset to me to the rage. The other thing that I think has been helpful to me, and I think is really important, is remembering that there was a time that I didn't know what I know. There's like a Malcolm X quote that speaks to this that I would butcher, trying to give it verbatim, but essentially, like he says, don't forget that there was a point at which you did not know what you know now, right? And so don't judge someone else for not knowing what you know now, because at some point you didn't know what you know now. And remembering that, just trying to remind myself that everybody is in a different place in this process. Some of us have been learning about this and studying this and exploring it and understanding it and coming, battling the dissonance and all of this for decades, right? And some people are just becoming aware of some of these things now, or are experiencing that dissonance and are struggling to accept, some of what is being presented to them. And that, like, that realization, I think Allison was talking about earlier, I think it was Allison, that like this country isn't what we thought it was, right? Or what we hoped it was. And some people are just now coming into that awareness, and having to kind of grapple with that dissonance and trying to find some grace for those people, even though there's also a whole lot of rage intermingled in that, because it's like, yeah, well, some of us have been trying to tell you that forever, right? And it's like, oh my God, you're just realizing because it's affecting you now, or it's because these certain things are happening that now you're concerned about it. That is really frustrating, but also trying to find the grace in that, to kind of just take that edge off a little bit so that I can have access to the parts of me that feel better to embody and help me to live that fuller life that you're talking about. And it's hard. It's really hard.
I think that's what makes it a practice, right? Is like that generosity of spirit, or that giving people grace, giving ourselves grace, right? Like if you find yourself, in that dorsal vagal despair, collapse, submit, can you give yourself grace? Can you be curious about, what's coming up for you, or how can you care for yourself? And after some time, how can you help yourself move to a place that feels more alive, more energizing, more mobilizing in a nonviolent way? Like we can't speed it up. We can't force ourselves to do it before we're ready, but maybe we can like take incremental shifts. And if you find yourself on the other end of like rage and a lot of activation, can do all the same things. Can you give yourself some, can you be curious about all that? And like we're all wired to kind of default to one end or the other end, particularly when we're stressed and under resourced, and like being really curious about that, and also like celebrating that, like the wisdom of our survival strategies, and that there isn't one right way to move through this time, and that if all of us show up in the ways that we are, wizards, or I really liked that, like, or whatever our, ways of being a warrior are, like those of us who are able to like step in the gap, or like provide more generosity, or, humanize things some more, yay. And those of us who, push people to do better, and like get in people's faces, yay, we need that. Like that there is room for all the different ways that we can show up to like disrupt the system, whether we're really quiet or really loud, or somewhere in between. Any final comments as we like wrap up? So enjoy being in community with you all. Well, maybe we could take a collective inhale, like taking in all of this positive energy and even the suffering, and exhaling it all out with some love and kindness, generosity. Thank you for all the ways you showed up tonight, and all the ways you show up in your life. And maybe this gave you one thing you can take away as a practice, or something to be curious or a little bit more gentle about in yourself, or maybe with others. And you know, I would say that rage is a stage of grief or a form of grief. And so like wherever you are in that grief process, maybe so. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.